of you actually knowing the name of Chloe Cole and her beginning the floodgates of Detransitioner speaking out. So I want to introduce Chloe Cole.
Hi, everybody. Hi. My name is Chloe Cole, and I am somebody who went through the transition process as a child. I call myself a detransitioner or a former trans kid, but to tell the truth, no one word or phrase could really capture the horrors of what I've been through. I started socially transitioning at the age of 12 and medically transitioning at the age of 13 with puberty blockers and testosterone. And at 15, I underwent a double mastectomy and my breasts were permanently removed. And it wasn't long after that I stopped transitioning because I realized that I severely regretted this and that I was losing opportunities as an adult because of decisions that I was making as a child. I wanted to be a mother one day. And if I were to continue down the path of being a faux male, I never would be able to do that. Now, you might hear from trans activists that it's quite difficult to get a hold of these treatments, that there's a long waiting list, and it takes years to even get a referral. This was quite the opposite of my experience, and I've heard the same from all my friends who transitioned under the affirmative care model. It only took me about 6 months after being diagnosed with gender dysphoria to actually be put on these treatments. And I was referred to the first endocrinologist about 2 to 3 months afterward. And it was roughly the same amount of time between even being referred to the surgeon and actually going under the knife. Now, it's important to mention that I was not pressured by my parents or family or by my school into following this path. I had actually discovered this from social media, and there were a lot of things that made me vulnerable to this. I was previously diagnosed with ADHD, but it's very likely that I'm actually on the spectrum, and I've always been kind of a tomboy. I found it more and more difficult as I got older to fit in with other girls, and I had some pretty severe body image issues. I started puberty at a very young age, and I just hated the feeling of watching my own body grow faster than I was as a person. And my doctors pretty much allowed me to direct the course of my own diagnosis and treatment. And they didn't give my mom or dad any other option. They told them that kids already know what gender they are from a very young age. And that the reason why I was pushing for this treatment so hard was because I knew exactly what I wanted. I knew what I was getting myself into. And they told them that it's very unlikely to regret these procedures. And if anything, it was more likely that I would regret going through my natural puberty, that it was very likely that I would end my life were I forced to go through puberty. Frankly, I find it disgusting that there are adults out there, including doctors and teachers and counselors, who think that they have a right to get in between a child and their family and push the child down a life of slavery to pharmaceuticals. Because I did that. I underwent these barbaric treatments as a kid, and I severely regretted it. But the regret isn't even the worst part. I've experienced serious complications from every single treatment. Because I was already a few years into puberty by the time that I was on the blockers, it essentially put me into a state of artificially induced menopause, and I started experiencing symptoms like being lethargic, hot flashes, and full body itching. And years after stopping blockers, I've started to get joint pains in my arms, my hands, my knees, my back. I get shooting pains up my spine. And while I was on the testosterone, I started to experience vaginal atrophy, which the endocrinologist told me about, but I was 13 years old. I hadn't even been sexually active yet, and I had no idea what this meant other than the tissues were thin and there may be some slight discomfort, and that if I were to experience this, I could be put on topical estrogen to treat it, which I did take it. But I didn't know that this atrophy could actually spread to the rest of the organs in the reproductive system and the pelvic region. And the testosterone, or rather the lack of estrogen circulating in my body, caused my urinary tract to atrophy as well. And I used to get blood clots in my urine, and I was very prone to infections for a while. I still get one every now and then, and to this day, it's still difficult to fully empty my bladder. And because of this surgery, of course, I'll never be able to breastfeed, which I was informed about before I went under, but I didn't know at the time, because I was 15, just how much this meant to me. I didn't even know that I wanted to eventually mother children of my own one day, naturally, and to feed them with what God gave me. And in losing my breasts, I've also lost a major part of my sexuality, of my womanhood, before I even was a woman. And that aside, they also use skin grafts as part of the surgery. They grafted my areolas, they took them off, and they put them onto an area of skin that was scraped, the way it was explained to me was like a deep knee scrape, but more controlled. And they put it in this position to make it for a more masculine appearance, they said. And at first, these grafts seemed to be healing as they should. But 2 years post-op, I started to experience some serious complications with them. They started to leak clear fluid, and I have no idea what this fluid is. I've tried to reach out to my surgeon, and I've gotten no answers. When I went to my gender specialist after I stopped transitioning, she just told me that my failure of a transition was just another part of my gender journey. My endocrinologist refused to give me any guidelines for going off of hormones. And I went off cold turkey. I had to figure out how to do it all on my own. And my surgeon's advice for my skin graft complications was to use Vaseline to keep them moist, which didn't make sense to me at the time because they were leaking fluid. But I thought, well, nothing else has worked. And he's a surgeon. I'd assume that he's done plenty of these before. So this must have happened. He's acting like it's normal. So I might as well take his advice. But when I did, it actually gave me a skin infection. I still have no clue what is going on with my skin grafts, with my reproductive system, or how my overall health is going to be affected by this in the coming years. There is very little data, and there aren't any standards of care for patients like me. So the same people who got me into the situation can't, or rather won't, help me. But the first state that can figure out how to care for those of us who have been harmed by this can be a model to other states and a hero to a growing demographic of victims. We are so, so incredibly thankful that Texas has entered the fight against this. Please support not only these bills, but the children and young men and women and families who are suffering through this. It is important that cases like ours are prevented and that children and vulnerable adults are kept out of harm's way through legislation, but this is an issue that extends beyond politics. Gender ideology is a plague upon healthcare, upon education, upon families. It has crept under our noses for far too long, and as adults, as parents, aunts, uncles, grandparents, teachers, we have a duty to protect our most vulnerable. Thank you.
Great.
As you can see, Chloe Cole is still standing. Our detransitioners are still standing. We are so proud of them. It is so difficult to come out and to speak, but there is something that they get from that. They get this solidarity. They can hear you listening to them. And we know that when we eventually dissolve Partners for Ethical Care, we know where our funding and our resources are going. They are going for these young people harmed by this ideology. We, after the affirmation model is no longer, will dissolve. Our organization has that as a goal. That affirmation model, stop. So you can see that there are people who have been harmed. That is not their destiny. That is not their destiny.